have you been doing over the last few days?
So the work that we've been doing during these days in Venice, together with the three delegations from Barcelona, Stockholm and Hamburg, consisted in the creation of PowerPoint that showed the history of trading in each city from its beginning to the modern age.
So how do you get to the final product?
We first learned to each school's presentation and learned about other cities' trading history, and then we all grouped the information, pointing out differences and similarities in the four cities.
And what do you think about Erasmus Plus?
I personally think that's been a unique experience from which we all learned a lot about our and other people's city. This experience didn't only give us the opportunity to improve our language skills, but also give us our formal knowledge and the opportunity to strengthen our interpersonal relations while making new friends and getting to know new habits and cultures.
The Romans used the port of Barcelona next to Montjuic mountain to export goods back to Rome. The most popular Catalan products were stone blocks for big buildings, fish and wine for Roman celebrations. The idea of a royal shipyard was conceived under Pedro III, and construction work began. The result was Drassana Shipyards, now is in the Maritime Museum, which reflects the city's desire to develop much-needed maritime commerce. In 1439, Alfonso the Magnanimous authorized the consulars of Barcelona to build a port in a location of their choosing. Work began in 1477. The wharf was subsequently renamed Bell Wharf, but it's no longer in existence. And so began the creation of an artificial port, built on the land reclaimed from the sea. In 1743, sand was a problem in the port. In 1772, the east wall was extended as far as what is now the Fisherman's Wharf. Work began in 1860 to extend the sea wall to solve the problem. By 1882, the sea wall extended as far as today floating dry dock. Over the course of the century, most sailing ships were replaced by steam-powered vessels. Characteristics of Hanseatic League dominated Baltic maritime trade for 3 centuries along the coast of northern Europe. They had their own legal system and operated their own armies for mutual protection and aid. Hansa territories stretched from the Baltic to the North Sea and inland during the late Middle Ages and diminished slowly after 1450. The rise of Dutch and English merchants and the pressure of Ottoman Empire contributed to its end. In the 16th century, dramatic increase of sea trade in Europe. In the 18th century, free trade between America and Barcelona. Until then, all the trades with America would be through Sevilla or Cádiz. Colonial trade. Lot of benefits importing raw products, coffee, sugar, tobacco, cocoa, gold and silver, and exporting elaborate ones, fabrics, wine, liquors, dried fruits, and papers. When the colonies got their independence, there is a dramatic decrease of importation and exportation.
The harbor has always been the heart of the city. There is a close link between the success of the port and its prosperity of the city and its inhabitants. The forerunner for the port was in the 9th century. The first major milestone that was important for the growth of the city and made Hamburg an important trading partner was the Hanseatic period. Hamburg joined the Hanseatic League in 1321 and specialized in the export of beer, which was soon became world famous. The first big challenge for the port of Hamburg were the pirates in the 15th century. At that time, the Hanseatic League was one of the largest supporters of Hamburg and one of the main reasons why Hamburg was able to maintain trade. In the course of the 16th century, Hamburg tried to close many new trade relations all over the world in order to be at the forefront of sea trading. At the end of the 9th century, there was a big reconstruction of the port. Many new things were replaced and many new things were added, such as the Speicherstadt. The port suffered enormously from the Second World War. 80% of the city was destroyed and could only be reconstructed with a lot of work and money. After all these events, Hamburg is now the third biggest port in Europe and the 17th biggest in the world. It occupies 10% of the city's area and is one of Hamburg's biggest attractions. Furthermore, it is now the lifeline of the city.
When we wonder of how the Venice we know has become such a beautiful and rich city, it's mainly due to its role in the trades all around Europe. Venice has a strategical position for trades, because it is on a protected, safe and calm lagoon in the middle of Europe, so it could and still can connect the east with the west and the north with the south. Venice, during the centuries, established and conquered many cities and islands, which were in some strategical points, mainly in the eastern Mediterranean, with its strong fleet made in the Arsenale, the Venetian factory of both battle and trading ships. The Venetian merchants traded with all the population around the Mediterranean, in the northern Europe, and even with the Far West, importing various spices, perfumes and slaves, and exporting oil, gold, salt and wool. Nowadays, Venice is not anymore based mainly on trade, but on tourism. In fact, what is left in Venice is the port of Marghera, an important industrial center of the 20th century, which made many electrical appliances and refined tons and tons of petrol and gases. But during the last period it has lost its importance.
Stockholm is the capital of Sweden. It is located between the Lake Mälaren in the west and the Baltic Sea in the east. The Vikings traded in Sweden already before Stockholm accrued in year 1187. In this time went circa 80% of all goods by ship. It were items like iron and copper. Later, in the Middle Ages, landed the ships to Stockholm on the east side, and they exited on the west. In that time were popular items butter, iron, copper and fur. Even if Stockholm wasn't part of the Hansa, were many countries interested in trading with Sweden, because Sweden produced weapons. In that time were many goods transported with cogs, special ships. In the 17th century, traded Stockholm not so much, because many countries wanted to get colonies, so the Swedes decided to use Göteborg to trade, because it's closer to the ocean. In that time came steamboats up, and the items were transported in boxes. Today Stockholm has 3 harbors, Kapellskär, Nynäshamn and Stockholm's Frihamnen, and 90% of all items goes by ship. The items are not any longer transported in boxes, but in containers. One of the top export goods in Sweden are cars and trucks.
We are here right now in the city of Venice in Italy, a city which is very prone to floodings and high water levels. Thankfully, we don't have that situation at the moment. Even though we don't have a flooding here right now, which the Venetians call acqua alta, they are expected to become more frequent and intense because of a problem that is affecting every one of us, global warming.
Like rising sea levels, stronger storms, and in general more extreme weather conditions, we decided to take a closer look at how these affect the 4 cities of Venice, Hamburg, Barcelona and Stockholm.
The floods in Barcelona aren't really common, but usually are caused by heavy rains. The zones that usually tend to flood are the nearest zones to the beach and the rivers. This causes that some subway stations have to close and the streets are flooded, because the drainage system isn't really prepared to drain a really big flow of water. Barcelona is situated in the Mediterranean Sea, and the torrential rains are a bit common, but the number of storms have increased. Also, the periods of drought are being more common, and in the summer, the temperature increases every year and causes a kind of tropical climate. 62. Torrential rain caused in all the metropolitan area of Barcelona floods that killed more than 1,600 people and destroyed the industrial zones near the city. Barcelona has an artificial drainage system for the metropolitan areas, and there's two different types. The unitary system is the one in which rainwater is transported and regulated jointly, and the separative system where the rainwater is transported through different ducts. Barcelona don't tend to have floods, but when they occur are due to the heavy rains, but don't cause a big impact to the city, thanks to the drainage system. In the future, the biggest problem to Barcelona will be the sea level rise.
Hamburg is a city with roughly 1.7 million inhabitants in the north of Germany. The river Elbe flows across the city, and it ends in the North Sea, which is part of the Atlantic Ocean. Being connected to the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, Hamburg can be prone to floodings because of big storms above the North Sea and the Atlantic. During the night from the 16th to 17th February 1962, because of a big storm, water was pressed into the city, causing one of the biggest floodings ever happened in Hamburg. 310 people died, and the population wasn't prepared on the high water levels. After this big flood, people started thinking about protection methods to be used. The main dike line, a line of hills and other artificial structures, about 8 meters high, was built and enforced. Some areas in the city, though, are not protected by this main dike line. These buildings have a protection method called building protection, so they have gates to protect themselves from the floods. This means that the lower levels of the buildings can be closed, so no water can enter into it. With Hamburg's main source of income being the harbor, there are also economical factors that need to be taken into account. The river Elbe needed to be deepened a few times already to make it possible for the bigger ships to be able to pass into the harbor areas. This deepening of the river causes more water to be inside the city. This is why floodings can be more aggressive now after the river has been deepened. Hamburg still needs to think about building higher walls and structures to protect the city from the rising water levels.
Also, Sweden is affected by the global sea level rise. However, there is also a post-glacial rebound in Scandinavia, meaning the rise of the land masses after having been pressed down by the ice sheets from the glacial period. This means that Stockholm is rising 4 to 5 millimeters per year. Therefore, the relative sea level rise is negative. Even so, Sweden will be affected by the sea level rise in the future because the land masses won't rise at the same rate forever. Although Stockholm is a coastal city next to a large lake, it doesn't get flooded often. However, in recent years, the number of floods have risen. Now, the main problem is the threat of floods through cloudbursts as a result of climate change. This is why assessments should be made of how the heavy rainfall might impact the city, using maps creating hypothetical cloudbursts and simulations of the water flow. Recommendations show that vital buildings such as hospitals, schools, and important infrastructure should be built above the level of 2.7 meters above sea level. The area in Stockholm where the danger of floods is the highest is by the Lake Mälaren. This lake provides drinkable water for 1/5 of the Swedish population, meaning that the fresh water must somehow be preserved. Mälaren is a big drainage basin where the rainwater accumulates after downfalls. If Mälaren would be overflooded, pollutants and chemicals in the soil could be swept into the lake, meaning that the water would be undrinkable. The lake drains into the Baltic Sea and is closely regulated so that the water level of Mälaren is higher than that of the sea. The construction Slussen is responsible for this. Two water discharge channels will let water pass into the sea if there would be heavy cloudbursts threatening to flood the area. Nevertheless, this will not be a sustainable solution forever. Other options, such as building barriers in the archipelago, have been discussed, but it will take a long time to find a suitable solution to this threatening problem.
The city of Venice is located in a lagoon, which is a territory between land and sea. Over time, lagoons can transform either into land or into sea. Venice is particularly interested in the sea level rise because it is transforming the Venetian lagoon and sea itself. For now, the biggest issue for the city is the high tide that overfloods the city's flooring, called acqua alta, or high water. High water is forecast to be more frequent and intense. In fact, from the year 1923, when the first exceptional high tide was registered, to 2000, there were 9 high waters over 1.40 meters, while in the last 20 years, there have already been 11. Every year, high water causes discomfort and inconvenience to Venetian citizens, and damage to the infrastructures and to the environment. Venetians found their own ways to cope with high water. As prevention, we installed sirens and weather forecasts on phones and calendars to warn people, while we tried to contrast the high water itself through bulkheads and water pumps positioned on the ground floor entrance of buildings, waterproof booths, and gangways provided by the city. But to solve all of the issues related to high water, the Italian state and the city itself gave birth to a system of gates, commonly known as mose, that close the 3 inlets that connect the lagoon to the sea, and other measures in favor of the lagoon environments. In the recent times, during October 2018, there has been the 4th highest tide ever. It caused many inconveniences. The schools remained closed for 2 days for weather alert, and the water flooded to 73% of the city, causing a lot of economical damages to shops and to the houses on the ground.
So, what do you think about the MOSE project?
Okay, so theoretically it was a good idea because it was a good way to resolve all of the parameters that the city of Venice gave to the constructors. But practically, the execution of it was really bad because it was supposed to be finished in 2015 and now it's 2019 and the project doesn't even work.
Besides Mose, Venice has other problems connected to the sea, like big ships. Every year, 466 big ships navigate in the lagoon. The biggest one being 350 meters long and 7 stories tall. 1.8 million tourists arrive every year by ships, causing an overcrowding issue. The number of inhabitants in Venice is 50,000, so the numbers are out of proportion. This has led to the start of a movement called No Grandi Navi that want to stop big ships from entering the lagoon. Big ship causes other problems like the tsunami effect, the upsetting of the lagoon bottom, and also they emit harmful gases that create a health problem to the inhabitants.
The main problems that Barcelona city has because of the cruises are the pollution and the tourism. In Barcelona there are 1.6 million inhabitants and every year 14.5 million tourists come to the city because of the good weather and many activities prepared for them. 2.6 million of them arrive by cruises. To try to solve this problem, the Generalitat add taxes to the tourists that want to visit the city, and every year they get 52 million in tax revenue. The pollution caused by the cruises is because they use a heavy fuel called fuel oil, which have a lot of particles concentration. The contamination from the big cruises can average 400 kilometers away from its origin, and it can arrive to the Pyrenees, Aragon, and the Valencian community. This contamination affects the human health, the agriculture, to the ecosystem, and also to the climate change.
To solve the problem of the pollution, we can make the ships consume electricity apart from gasoline, making them hybrids and more environmentally friendly. When the ship stops in the port, they keep the engine on to keep all the electric system working. So a solution could be to use gas, because the port of Barcelona has large deposits of this fuel. But this solution is difficult, because in the Baltic Sea there is only one ship prepared to work with gas.
In Hamburg we have two cruise ship terminals. There's one in Altona and one in Steinwerder. Another one is almost finished. Here you can see the design of the new terminal, which is built in the Hafen City. The Hafen City is the most modern district of Hamburg. It includes the major attractions like the Elbphilharmonie or Landungsbrücken. With the new terminal, the air pollution and other things will increase. Hamburg has problems with big cruise and container ships because the Elbe isn't deep enough. That's why we use erosion to solve that. Another problem is that those ships are getting bigger and bigger, so the most famous bridge of Hamburg, called Köhlbrandbrücke, isn't high enough anymore. That's why the Hamburg politicals think about destroying the bridge. Another point is that our city is already crowded and Hamburg continues bringing bigger ships with more people here. But the government also tries to make cruises more environmentally friendly. We have one shore electricity connection in Hamburg.
Compared to the other cities, Stockholm doesn't have as many problems. The biggest problem, which people also complain about a lot, is the noise level problem. The noise is caused by the cruisers coming into the port. We only have a small portion of air pollution because the chimneys of the cruisers are so high up in the air and are able to spread the emissions out over the city. The main air pollution connected to the cruise ship industry comes from the buses that take the tourists into the city. Besides these problems, we only have a few minor other problems. The reason why Stockholm doesn't have as many big problems as the other cities is because of our natural tourism cycle between May and September, so the summer in Stockholm. Stockholm can during that time of year prepare for the arriving tourism season. And is in that way able to handle the amount of tourists coming into Stockholm. During the winter, Stockholm mainly focuses on sustainability and on improving the ports and ships to be more environmentally friendly alternatives. A good example for this is the Norwich port, also called the Port of the Future, because of the environmentally friendly alternatives used in the building of the port. For instance, Stockholm has for a few years now carefully chosen the materials to make the port as sustainable as possible. Because of all these factors, Stockholm is one of the most environmentally conscious cities in Europe.